Hello, today we are rebuilding the front forks of my Honda HRC 125R. I will show you the things you need to do this. I have two manuals. One on the right is the actual manual for my motorcycle. It's a 1997 HRC 125R, and the other manual is a 2001 manual, the difference being that this one is in English and the original one is in Japanese. The tools you need to rebuild these front forks are as follows. Special tools over here. You need this measurement tool to get the right amount of fork oil into the forks when you have rebuilt them. You have this 36 millimeter slider, which will help drive in the oil seal into the forks. Then you have this fork set collar. It's a HRC tool which I highly recommend using. It protects the outer fork from slamming into the lower part because this collar comes right here. Also, all the measurements described in the manual are being measured with this collar in place, so you actually need it. Another special tool is a torque wrench because you need to torque some parts, and then normal tools, you need some tape. You need a 32 millimeter part. It has to be a high one. If it is a lower one, it will not work because you will not have enough space to put it there. You also need a 22 millimeter one. You need a 17 millimeter open wrench. You need a small flat screwdriver. You need to have a measuring tape, and to have some precision measuring is also advised for the front fork setting. Some rags are needed. You need a special Showa SS05 fork oil, brake cleaner to clean the parts that come out of the forks, and then here the parts that I will actually rebuild. The front fork bolt O-ring, the preload adjuster O-ring, the stop ring, the oil seal, backup ring, guide bushing, and the slider bushing. So with these parts and tools, we will be able to rebuild the front forks. What is nice, of course, is that there are two front forks, the other one standing over there. I've already rebuilt that one. It allowed me to take a lot of time to find some issues and some difficulties, and now the second one on tape should go much easier. I am not a licensed motorcycle mechanic. I follow the steps described in the manual, and so you should take precautions to do everything in the right way if you're going to do this by yourself. First step, release the bolts and install the collar. second step. Put on the 22. Remove the preload adjuster. And then there is a spring adjusting plate in there. Spring adjusting plate. So far we have disconnected the fork bolt. We have also removed the adjuster from there, and also the spring adjusting plate. We have removed that sits in here normally, in there. Now we're leaking out the oil. The next step will be in here you see this rod, the damper rod in there in the spring, which is connected to this bolt, and now we need to separate them. So how we will do is we will need to move this part, slide it down, use some force and a piece of cloth, slide it down. Then this 17mm wrench will fit into a cutout there, and then while holding this with a 32mm we can remove this bolt from the rod. So then the bolt comes off and the rod will remain. Then we can remove this part and we can remove the spring as well and get some more oil out. This is our 17mm. We need to push this down. Not easy. And then this fits in between. Okay, there we have it. So you can see here is a cutout where the 17mm tool fits in. And now we're going to hold this and screw off the bolt. Okay, so now we need to remove the bolt. This was the most difficult part when I did the first spring. It's very difficult to put force on this bolt and stopping it with this part, especially when you put the forks in a vertical position. So I kind of use the floor as a leverage. And in that way it is easier. I've actually already done it, and now I'll just show you on film. I use this setup, then I use this one to go up here, and then I just press the whole thing down. So this lever will put force on that, and by doing that the whole thing will turn. But I already did it off camera. Okay, so we release this one. So the bolt goes from the damper rod. So this is the damper rod going all the way in there. And we can also release this one. And then this part comes off. this one and this one. Put them back in the right order, and later we will clean them with brake oil. And now the spring also comes out. What I do to make sure that I know which part of the spring is the top is I connect this little piece of wire to the top of the spring, and then I can easily remember that that is the top. Because there is no marking, I didn't find any marking. According to the manual there should be a marking on the spring, but I didn't find it. Now we can remove some more of the oil. When we move this up and down, you also hear pumping sounds. Supposed to do this about 10 times, sliding the rod up and down, letting the hydraulics work to remove more of the oil. After this, I will leave the forks to drip out for about 10 minutes or so. You can actually remove this whole rod from the system. Then you need to disconnect a bolt that is in here, and then you can take it out, but I am not going to do that. There is no need for that. Okay, another quick recap so far. There is the fork still leaking. We have removed the fork bolt, the preload adjuster, the spring adjusting plate. We have also removed the spring seat stopper, as it is called, then the spring collar, and the joint plate. Lastly, we have removed the spring itself, and we have marked the top of the spring so we can remember how that goes back in. As you see, everything is lined up in the right order. This one should go here, and this is everything that we have removed so far. We will clean these parts with our brake cleaner, and as a next step we will separate the outer fork from the slider. Okay, next step. So here's our forks. This part is the outer tube. This part is the damper rod, which goes all the way inside, all the way up to here. And if I slide this upwards, this part is the slider. So there's actually three parts. The damper rod goes into the slider all the way up to here. This is the outer tube, and this is the slider. Now, to be able to separate the outer tube from the slider, we will need to remove the stop ring, and I'll show you now how that goes. The stop ring is sitting in here. You can see it over there. I now need to very, very gently and very carefully use a screwdriver, but not scratching the slider, of course. So we need to use the screwdriver to release this. Okay, there you go. So this is released. We move it down there, And now, with this one released, these two parts can separate. In here, we have the slider bushing, the guide bushing, the backup ring and the oil seal. But since the stop ring is removed, I will be able to remove those two parts. So we will do that now. With strong strokes, we push them out a couple of times until everything comes out. There you go. The outer tube has been removed from the slider, and now you can see all parts very clearly. This one is the slider bushing, this one is the guide bushing, this one is the backup ring, and this one is the oil seal, and over here we have the stop ring. I have all these new parts, so I'm going to replace all these parts I just mentioned before rebuilding the fork, adding new fork suspension oil and closing it. So we are going to remove the slider bushing. It is sitting in its own, let's say, seat in the slider. We need to use the flat screwdriver to gently try to break this open. And then we need to try to remove the slider bushing. It's really not too easy, and you need to be gentle not to damage the slider, because a damaged slider would result in leaks. Okay. Now the guide bushing, much easier. Then the stop ring. Here we need to make sure the stop ring has a upper side and a bottom side. They are different. The part facing upwards is flat, and this part here, which is touching the oil seal, is rounded. So it is very important that we know that. So when we put in the new backup ring, that we put the rounded part down and the flat part up. So here you can see the rounded part, and the back is flat. Then the oil seal itself. The oil seal is also has two different sides, one up and one down. There are some markings on it here, and these markings need to go down, and the open part needs to go up. Okay, so this is the old stop ring. We're going to replace it by the new stop ring. The new one. Slide it all the way there, out of the way. Then we're going to replace the old oil seal by the new oil seal. Before we do this, we need to tape this part, because this has two sharp grooves which hold the slider bushing. This one sits here between those two grooves, but they are very sharp, so they can actually damage and cut the oil seal. So we're going to tape this, and then we can slide the oil seal over these parts down there. So we'll use the tape over here. Okay, then our new oil seal needs to be put into the fork oil. And then we need to put it on with the markings that you can see here, down in that direction, and with the open part up. Gently put this into place. Gently slide it over the tape. Try to keep it as straight as possible, not to damage it. Okay, there we go, and we slide that down. Then we are going to replace the backup ring by a new one over here. Here's our new backup ring. Rounded part, flat part. We put it in some oil. The rounded part goes down. Before we do that, we quickly remove the tape. Rounded part down, flat part up. Next is the guide bushing. This is the old guide bushing. Here is the new guide bushing. This guide bushing, we will again put it into the fork oil, and we gently and carefully slide it over our slider tube. Lastly, the slider bushing. We need to be very careful with this one. Here's the new one. Here you can see where it splits, but we need to try to minimize the force we put on there. We need to split it a little bit so it can go over the slider to its place, but we need to try to minimize that. So I put some oil on it, and this goes here between those two grooves where we used to put the tape. Now we have a screwdriver here. This is really not so easy, and we need to be very gentle. As you can see, we have put it in place. We have very gently opened it a little bit so we could move it over the slider, and then we slid it down. It's time to assemble the outer tube back on the slider. So there we go. Gently. Now we need to drive in the guide bushing and the backup ring into the outer tube. For that we use the driver you see here. Okay. Now we need to do the same thing with the oil seal. Need to drive the oil seal in its place. Now we need to have a quick inspection to see whether it's deep enough, so we can fit the stopper ring here. That seems to be right. And now we need to assemble the stopper ring. And we need to make sure that the stopper ring is seated in the groove, so the stopper ring really locks the suspension. Quick inspection. That's right. Yes, so the ring is in. At this moment, our outer tube is installed. All the seals are back in place. And now we can start filling the fork with oil and installing it and closing it. Now we're going to fill the forks with oil. There's about 233 cubic centimeter that goes into the tube. We first need to put about half of that into it, then take some steps to get the air out of it. Then we put a reminder oil. Then we will need to bleed again to get all the air out, followed by fine measuring the height of the oil into the forks, and when the height is correct we can close the forks. So I'll start with putting in about 100 something milliliter of oil into the forks. I've put about 120 milliliter of fork oil into the inner tube, and now we need to bleed the system. The way we need to do that is to raise the outer tube for a maximum of 22.5 centimeter. So I've measured 22.5 centimeter here, and so that's about the maximum. Then we need to put our hand and close the outer tube and press the whole thing down slowly without releasing the air from the top. Okay, and then we need to repeat this 8 to 10 times. We have now added the remaining oil in there, although we still need to measure whether it's not too much or not enough. So it needs to be just right. And then we need to bleed the system again, and then we will still need to make some adjustments. So now we will measure. We need to have oil in the tube, and we need to have a 112 millimeter from the top to the oil level. So I have here with this black tape, I've measured 112 millimeter. We'll put that into the tube, and then with this device we'll pump out the oil just up to the right height. Normally you can use this to connect to this device, and then that just goes to the top of the slider, but unfortunately this suspension part is too narrow for this part to work well. This goes there. It's all very nice in theory, but actually it's struggling. So I put quite a lot of oil in it, which now all needs to go out, and measuring again. Okay, there we are. Now we need to bleed the system one more time. So 22.5 centimeter up, maximum. Close the outer tube with a hand, let no air escape, and push down slowly. Repeat this 8 to 10 times. So we have bled the system twice, and now we need to see, after I refilled a little bit more oil after the bleeding process, now we're going to make sure that the oil level is completely right. And after that, the forks need to rest for about 10 minutes. While the fork is resting to stabilize the oil within the system, we have time to change the sealing rubbers of our bolt and our adjuster bolts by new rubbers, which I have here. So first we remove the old rubber, always gently, to not scratch the part. So this is the old one. Here we have a new one. Dip it in some oil. Okay, done. And the same goes for our adjuster here. Not unlike the oil filter cap on a car. Old one, remove. And here's the new one. Some oil. And put it in place. Okay, time to put the spring back into the forks, and connect the cap. So our rope indicated the top of the spring, so we remove it. And we install the spring. On top of that goes this part. And this one. And then this one. But before we do that, we need to lift this up. Okay, now we will need to use our 17 open-ended wrench again. Pull this down, slide this to lock it, and then close the cap with the right amount of torque. We need 34 Newton meter, So I've set my torque wrench to 34 Newton meter, and then we're going to try to lock it. It is not easy to do. Okay. .34 Newton meter. I'm going to use my leg to stop the force, and then we try to apply the correct force. Okay. Now this can be released. And now we can connect the outer tube to the outer bolts. Okay. In goes the spring adjusting plate. Give it some lubrication. Those 3 pins need to go into the 3 holes in the tube. Yep. And then our preload adjuster goes on top of that. For this we can use the 22 millimeter. The standard preload adjuster height is 19 millimeter. And done. Remove the collar. A quick wipe. Of course, there's some oil everywhere. This is the rebound adjuster. We're going to put it in the standard setting, which is 6 clicks back from maximum. So first we go to maximum. Okay, that's here, and now 6 clicks back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we have the compression damping adjuster. The standard position is 7 clicks from maximum. So first we'll go to maximum. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So the whole fork is rebuilt and is now in the correct standard position. Okay, the two forks are rebuilt, job done, all new parts as new.